around this staff, and I was kind of first getting very enthusiastic about this subject. I was getting teased a little bit because I was maybe a little over enthusiastic. So I've learned to kind of tone it down a little bit, but I'm still really excited and enthused about this subject we're going to learn about. And it's about building soil, which, you know, we've always known that's a good deal. But now we know that we can actually make a difference by taking carbon dioxide out of the air and sequester it in the soil. And I've been interested in this subject for a long time, but what I really didn't know before I read Kristin's book, The Soil Will Save Us, just how much is going on around the world of people doing this, and it's just, there's just amazing stories, and it's just this kind of odd synchronicity, I guess, of people doing stuff here and people doing stuff there, and I don't think anybody really knew all what was going on. And then since her books come out, this movement, I think, is really taking off. So I think we're really in for a treat to find out these stories of what people are doing to build soil. So, Kristin Ohlson, well, I think I'll just read this one thing in here that I think is very nice. It's by microorganisms. He wrote The Soul of a Chef. He wrote, Ohlson conveys her information in the lively manner of writers such as Michael Pollan and Roland Jacobson, making complicated ideas easily accessible to the reader, so that we see the ground at our feet not as dead dirt, but rather as, in her words, a coral reef teeming with life, a massive biological machine in which the health of our species depends. We're lucky to have this account. And for a short time after, Kristin's book is going to be available out here in the lobby, and I highly recommend it, and I'm sure after you hear her speak, you will definitely want a copy. So, Kristin.
Hi. I've got my timer on because I can get really crabby about this stuff. So a few weeks ago, I did something that I haven't done in a really long time, which is I read my own book cover to cover. Book publishers are on a very long schedule, and so I hadn't really read it cover to cover since sometime in 2013. Yeah, and and you were reading, I was reading it over and over again to make sure there weren't mistakes and typos, and of course there still are. But after you read it over and over and over again, you just can't even stand to read it anymore. So I was on a plane and I started to read my book cover to cover back in seat 27A, and to my surprise and slight chagrin, I started to get all teary. I started to tear up and had to turn my face to the window so everybody around me didn't see me blubbering over my own book. But and I think that it's, I still am so moved by this amazing subject matter, soil, and how alive it is, and what the implications for life on the planet are. Writing this book changed me forever, because it brought me into contact with this passionate group of farmers, food activists, and land activists, and scientists, and they all really gave me hope that we as human beings can live to work and live in harmony with nature and stop screwing up the planet. And I really had not believed that until I worked on this book and talked to all these people. And I certainly hadn't known much about soil. So I grew up in California. I grew up in the Sacramento Valley, and in the foothills of the Sacramento Valley. And from our house, we could look out through the valley and see all that great agricultural stuff going on. And my grandparents were farmers, and my parents were devoted gardeners, and they were devoted consumers of fresh fruits and vegetables, and they knew where every farm market was in the state. So we talked a lot about food and produce and all that kind of stuff. But as much as my family was interested in food and agriculture, and as much as my parents really knew a lot about gardening, they didn't know anything about soil. And I've been interested in food and gardening ever since I've been an adult, but I didn't really know anything about soil either. Until a couple of years ago, when this chef in Cleveland, where I used to live, I had written an article about him for Gourmet magazine, and he was one of those pioneering chefs that started bringing local food into his restaurant back in the 1980s. And he's very involved with agriculture issues in the state. So I was always, he's just one of the most interesting thinkers that I know, and I was always calling him up and saying, well, what else should I be writing about? What else in this sort of connection between food and agriculture and environment is going on? And one day he said, carbon farming, that's what you should be writing about. All these farmers are talking about how they can do their work in a way that puts carbon into the soil instead of releases carbon from the soil, because that's what most conventional agriculture does. It releases carbon from the soil. So carbon farming is the kind of farming that makes land healthier and not sicker. So what I developed and then I set off and started talking to people, and then this book was the result. So what I developed in the course of writing this book was this really huge sense of wonder about what's going on under our feet. I walk on the earth differently, knowing that about the vastness of life down there. Scientists think that there are 300 sextillion stars, which is a 3 followed by 23 zeros in the skies. But there's a comparable density of microorganisms in the soil. They estimate, and it's really hard to get perfect numbers on this stuff, but they estimate that there are 6 billion microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil, which is really almost beyond what our brains can take. It's like pondering infinity. It's just hard to make sense of that much life in a space that's that small. So those microorganisms have been, they've been found as deep in the soil as 10 miles down. And it's really important that we figure them out, even though we can't see them, because pretty much everything that we want and rely upon above the surface of the soil depends on what they do down there. So I want you to walk away from this talk with what I think is reasonable new hope about our environment. So working about this book allowed me to take heart. I never doubted the global warming science for a minute, but it really made me unhappy, and I didn't want to hear about it all the time because it seemed so hopeless. Because it was obvious that we as a people are not doing the things that will halt in a dramatic way the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And I didn't realize it when I started working on the book that those early calculations didn't take into account something that's really huge, and that's soil. And most of us don't take soil into account. We think of Earth, planet Earth, as this air and water and land, but we think of land as this sort of very thin crust over this big hunk of dead rock that's hurtling through space. And even though I've been a gardener for all my life, and my parents were gardeners, and grandparents are farmers, I had, and I would hear people talk about life in the soil, but I had no idea, really, I don't think they did either, had an idea of how profound that was. When I heard life in the soil, I would think of earthworms and beetles and a mole or something. And it's true, they live in the soil, but those things are like the leviathans of the soil. Those are like the great blue whales and the giant squids and the great white sharks, and the life in the soil that we really depend upon is these tiny, tiny life forms that have been there long before there was anything else on Earth, and that are crucial to making sure our planet functions as one great ecosystem. So the recognition of soil microorganisms' importance is pretty new, and I think it's very much like all the new work that's going on to understand what's happening with the microorganisms in the human body. Our fear of germs, which to me is epitomized by all the stupid hand sanitizers everywhere, is kind of crazy when we understand that our bodies are, have 10 times as many bacterial cells as we do human cells. And I think the latest count on the human microbiome in our gut, and they're also outside of us too, but they're really important on the inside. It's 100 trillion microorganisms in the human gut. If you compare the number of human genes in our bodies to the number of microbial genes, the numbers are even crazier. 23,000 human genes versus 3.3 million microbial genes. And we're pretty much a ship of microbes, one that's been designed and built and operated by the microbes. And the right way to describe us is a superorganism. We are a superorganism. We are an organism made up of many organisms, and pretty much all living things are also superorganisms. And if you took all those microbes out of our body, they'd fill a half-gallon jug and they'd weigh several pounds, and scientists now think that those microorganisms that are in our body are as important as an organ, as important as a pancreas, as important as a liver, and that they carry on these really important functions in terms of our metabolism and our immune systems, and even our brains, even how our brains function, even affecting things like depression and degeneration. So when you think about that, it's kind of amazing that doctors were able to be helpful at all 10 years ago when they didn't know that stuff. But now they really are understanding. We need that human microbiome. We need it to be vigorous. We need it to be active. We need it to be in balance. And just as people are starting to understand that about the human body, everybody has to start to understand that about the earth. From ordinary people to policymakers. We have to understand that Earth's microbiome is even more dense and diverse and essential. And the only way to live on this earth without destroying it is to learn how to live in harmony with that vast, invisible, and incredibly powerful biological force. So healthy soil has this vigorous, balanced population of microorganisms: bacteria, fungi, protozoa, microarthropods, nematodes, other tiny creatures. Scientists have known that they're there for a while. Where's my timer? But haven't really understood what they were doing. So what keeps emerging now is that there is this incredible partnership, a very ancient partnership between plants and soil microorganisms. And this partnership created the green growing world around us that modern humans evolved into 276,000 years ago. And it set the stage for us and other mammals. And the microorganisms have been in the soil for around 2 billion years. And when plants began moving from oceans and water to land, they tapped into a system that the microorganisms already had in the soil, a system that already existed to move water and minerals and gases around. So what are the terms of this partnership? Most of us already are very familiar with photosynthesis. This is like the great biological marvel of our planet that bacteria began 3 billion years ago, which changed the atmosphere of the earth into one that we can breathe. And photosynthesis is now carried on by both plants and microorganisms, but when plants conduct photosynthesis, they perform another function that's critical for keeping the world in balance. They use energy from sunlight to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they toss off the oxygen. They don't really need that. That's their waste product. And they convert the carbon dioxide into a carbon-based fuel that fuels their growth, that fuels their stems and their leaves and their fruits and their roots. And this is the really critical part for what I'm talking about. 40% or even more of that carbon fuel that plants work so hard to make gets shunted down to the roots, gets sent down to the roots, and shared with this population of soil microorganisms that's around the plant's roots. So remember, 6 billion microorganisms per table of soil, or per teaspoon of soil. So they're sending it down there to those microorganisms that are in the soil, and in exchange, so it's a trading relationship. It's like a bazaar, a busy, crazy, noisy bazaar going on down there by the roots of the plants. In exchange for that food, that energy that plants are bringing to the soil microorganisms, the soil microorganisms are bringing them nutrients that they have liberated from rock and sand and silt and clay. So they're bringing nutrients, they're bringing fertilizer, is what it, another way to look at it. They're bringing nutrients to the plants are giving them energy. And that's been the deal for millions and millions of years. That's how plants have always been fertilized. So this is a really foundational partnership in nature. There are other partnerships in nature that we can see. We can see other, like there's a tree called the bullhorn acacia tree that has populations of ants living on it. And the ants get food and shelter from the tree. And the tree gets protection from insects that would eat the tree, because the ants defend their nests. But for most of human history, we haven't been able to look underground. We haven't been able to see what's going on under there. But now we're starting to understand that what we're seeing evidence of in the soil is these very, very complex relationships. If we could look down in the soil, just with our eyes, we'd see around the roots of every plant, a Portland, Oregon, or a Paris, or a Rio de Janeiro, this busy metropolis of microscopic life doing business with the plant. So there are 98 naturally occurring elements on our planet, and it's possible that plants, and we need all of them to grow, not just a handful of nutrients that are tossed out in chemical fertilizers. And the way they've always gotten those nutrients is through that trading relationship with microorganisms. You walk in the woods and you see, you'll walk in places that humans haven't disturbed, and you see plants growing like crazy, and it probably never occurs to you to say, whoa, nobody fertilized that. Why is it growing so well? Well, it's that relationship that they have with microorganisms. And so that relationship that plants have with those microorganisms is also the way that carbon builds up in the soil. So the microorganisms are eating that carbon fuel that they get from the plants, and then they excrete it, and other microorganisms eat them and excrete it, and it just sort of keeps getting condensed and condensed and condensed in the soil. That carbon fuel is also called exudates. That's what plant roots are exuding. Keeps getting more and more concentrated in the soil. And it also gets concentrated in the soil through another way, which is that the microorganisms make a kind of carbon glue that they create habitat in the soil. So they'll pull together pieces of silt or a piece of sand and a little piece of leaf and glue it together because they want habitat in the soil to protect them from being eaten by other organisms in the soil, and to control the flow of water in the soil. So they're like these little micro-engineers of the soil, and they wind up creating what I like to think of as stacks and stacks, billions of little cups and saucers in the soil. Or another way to think of it is like a coral reef. That when we're walking over healthy soil, we're walking over something that's extremely porous. It's not, we sort of think of solid earth. It's not that solid. It's like a giant sponge. And most of us don't realize that it's the carbon that makes soil healthy. It's the carbon that the plants are feeding to the soil microorganisms, they're fixing in the soil. That's what makes soil so good, because we've got this idea that carbon is bad. From all the talk about global warming, that skies are overloaded with carbon dioxide. Well, carbon is not a bad thing. Carbon is necessary to life, but it's way too much up there and not enough down there. So good soil is also knitted together by microscopic mats of fungi, which pierce the roots of plants and share water and nutrients in a plant community. And these hyphae can run for 250 feet or more. I talked not long ago to a researcher in the Pacific Northwest who's studying forests, and she's done all this amazing work showing how that fungal network between trees, how trees are sending water and nutrients back and forth, nurturing young trees, trying to raise up young trees by concentrating water and nutrients on those young trees. So it makes sense that healthy soil with all those cups and saucers is really porous, and because of that structure, they can receive and hold water in a way that unhealthy soil can't. And that's important these days because we're all worried about water. We're worried about either not enough rain or too much rain, and that seems to be the choices that we have. Not enough rain or too much rain. But for every 1% of increase in soil organic matter, which builds up through that partnership between plants and soil microorganisms, an acre of soil can hold an extra 25,000 gallons of water. But the problem is that almost everything that we humans have done since we began agriculture has disrupted that partnership. And it's not just a problem with modern architecture, modern agriculture, or modern chemical agriculture, even though that's the best way that we've ever come up with to ruin soil. But as soon as we domesticated wild herds and changed the way they moved over the land, and as soon as we started to dig up the earth and plow to plant our seeds, and as soon as we started to eliminate the great diversity of plant life in an area to raise the one crop that we wanted to take to market, that's called a monoculture, as soon as we started keeping the land bare around that one crop, as soon as we interrupted the feeding relationship between plants and soil microorganisms with fertilizers, all these things disrupt that relationship. So we started doing a lot of this stuff 12,000 years ago. And we started liberating carbon from the soil and sending it up to the sky. And some scientists estimate that 80 billion tons of carbon have been lost from soils through agriculture and other land use. Ancient humans warmed the climate so much with their land use, and that also included burning down forests and stuff like that, that one scientist thinks that we avoided another ice age 2,000 years ago. So land use still accounts for about 30% of the carbon going into the atmosphere. So all that carbon that's in the atmosphere is called the legacy load. And the climate change conversation in this country, and to a certain extent around the world, erroneously focuses only on what's going up. They don't think about what's going down or what isn't going down. So they focus on the 2 parts per million of carbon dioxide that's going up into the atmosphere that humans add every year. And of course, it's important to reduce that as much as we can. But the conversation doesn't pay enough attention to the 400 parts per million that are already there. But that, even if we stop doing everything that we're doing wrong about putting carbon up into the atmosphere now, so if we stopped, it's not going to happen, but if we stopped right now, today, sending up fossil fuel emissions, that carbon that's in the atmosphere would continue to warm the planet for decades, if not centuries. So we're absolutely cooked if we don't get some of that carbon out of the atmosphere. And the best way to do that, the cheapest and most widely available technology, the technology that's been at work for a very long time without glitches or unintended consequences, is the technology that nature invented millions of years ago, and that's plant photosynthesis, working with soil microorganisms to stash that carbon in the ground. So how much carbon can be fixed in the soil? I had a conversation with Ratan Lal, who was one of the first scientists who started paying attention to this back in the 80s. And he told me recently that the very best research, and there isn't enough research, but the very best research that he's seen so far using simple agricultural techniques, so he was just talking about no-till agriculture and cover crops, that we can draw down and sequester as much as 1.5 tons of carbon in every 2.5 acres. And I know that there are other scientists who have even much more optimistic scenarios. Like one guy's research says that we could sequester 10 tons per acre, also using pretty simple agricultural techniques. And our biggest impact on the environment is agriculture. 4 billion acres of cropland around the world, 14 billion acres of rangelands. And because of the practices used by most agriculturalists, the soil in most of those lands is very sick, biologically sick. According to Ratan Lal, 1/4 of the Earth's land mass is degraded and sick from human activity. So we could look at that and go, oh my God, we're sunk. Or we can look at that as a huge opportunity. You know, we are learning more and more about how to make land healthy, working with plants, working with nature. So that degraded land that's been stripped of its carbon is really a prime target. So that's what the soil health movement that's going on around the world is doing. So when I first started working on this book, I was calling scientists, and going to conferences where I could talk to scientists. And a lot of the scientists doing really great work on this said right away, well, you know, science is really not in the lead on this. It's innovative farmers around the country and around the world who are doing some really great work. They're the ones who are showing on their land that this can be done, you know, that we can change our agriculture, that we can build up carbon in the soil, that we can start to reverse a lot of the damage that we've done. So that eventually led me to this guy named Dave Brown, who I wrote about in the book, and he's a farmer with a 5,000 acre farm in North Dakota, where he gets about 16.5 inches of rain a year. And he started doing what he's doing about 15 years ago. And he started off as a conventional farmer, you know, with all the playbook from industrial agriculture. He went to ag school and learned to plow and till and spray chemicals and do all that stuff. And he went to no-till pretty early because he observed on his land that his soil was just dry, so dry after he tilled that he thought, well, that can't be good. So he figured out how to go no-till. And then he had this incredible 4-year battle with nature. You know, one year there was drought and all his crops died. And the next year there was hail and all his crops died. And the next year there was late frost and all. You know, 4 years in a row, everything died. And he didn't even have the money to buy all those chemicals that he was supposed to use. So, you know, what he just sort of was trying to hang on to the place. So he was still doing no-till. When these ruined crops were in the field, he would just send in his cattle to eat them down and stomp them down and hope to start over the next year. But, you know, and he planted cover crops in the fall because he figured that, you know, he wanted to protect that soil that was there as much as possible. He did start to notice that his land started to be more resilient. And he started to think, that with the help of a government scientist in the Agricultural Research Service and a government conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, he started to explore whether he could do all the things with his land, whether by working with nature, whether there were natural forces that would do all the things with his land that he used to do with chemicals and machines. You know, would nature fertilize his crops? Would nature make the soil friable? So he started to understand about why his land was seeming more resilient. That he was, with his tillage, he wasn't disrupting all those cups and saucers and those mats, those microscopic mats of fungi in the soil. And he started to understand that when he was planting these cover crops, what he was doing, it wasn't just protecting the soil from erosion. He was those cover crops were pumping food down to that community of soil microorganisms there, and they were, you know, jump-starting that community. And he realized, so he really started to take it to town. You know, he went from just trying a couple of cover crops to going to these really much bigger cover crop combinations. So now he uses like 25, 30 cover crops in a single area because he's trying to pump as many varied varied combinations of exudates down to those soil microorganisms. So his farm is near some areas that are native prairie, and those areas of native prairie, you know, there was a botanist who went in and counted up all the plants that were in a square foot of this native prairie. There are 140 plants in this square foot. So that's how diverse nature is. He's trying to, I don't think he can do 140, but he's trying to match that diversity as much as possible, because what he's trying to do as much as possible is mimic nature. So he understands that cattle have a healthy impact on the land if they're managed properly. They're dropping dung, which is full of microorganisms, you know, related microorganisms to the ones that are in the soil. They're stomping down grasses so that the microorganisms can get to them. They're opening up the soil with their hooves. If they're managed properly, they have a very healthy impact on the land. So he started holistically grazing his cattle. Anyway, he started making all these changes on the land, and now he uses no fertilizer, no pesticides, no fungicide, no herbicide, none of those other asides. I know that there are more. No things hanging from his cow's ears. And to prepare a new field for his crops, he plants a cover crop, what's called a cover crop cocktail, these big mixtures of cover crops. He'll plant that maybe a couple of seasons, and each time those things are ready to harvest, he sends his cattle in to eat them and stomp them down. So the results now are, he gets 27 more bushels for corn. He gets 27 more bushels of corn per acre than the county average, but he only spends $1.25 to produce those bushels versus $3.50 for the county average. The organic matter in his soil has gone from 1.7% to 5.3%, and that's probably an old number. And his son wants to take it to 12%. And in a time when we all worry about rain, too much or not enough, this is another really remarkable change on his farm. So he had a soil infiltration test done 12 years ago, I think. And that test showed that water would percolate. It took water, a half an inch of water an hour to percolate down into his soil. And now he's got 8 inches that percolate down into his soil. So he doesn't irrigate, and he's not worried about drought, and he's not worried about those intense rainfalls where you get 8 inches in 2 hours, because the soil will suck up those overwhelming rains, and it will hold on to that water for a long time. So I cut back a bunch of this because I didn't want to talk too long. So this is a really hopeful and exciting time. Gabe Brown is really just one example of someone working with this partnership between plants and soil microorganisms. And he's thriving as a business person because of it. But there are really thousands of other farmers around the world. And Gabe himself has hundreds of visitors every year. So I think the message that we can take away from that, and I think this is really important to understand, that the people, the businesses that make a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars from selling products to farmers, they always raise a false dichotomy. They say, well, yes, you can have good food that's easy on the environment. It probably is better, but we need enough food. We need enough food to feed this burgeoning world population. And I think what Gabe and these other farmers are showing that is a false dichotomy, that we can have good food and good agriculture and enough food. As I hope you know, the UN declared 2015 the International Year of Soils, and soil is now being discussed with great enthusiasm all over the world. And I learned a few months after my book came out that the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is the modern day iteration of the Soil Conservation Service that was born in the Dust Bowl, they're kind of returning to their roots. And they're running a really vigorous program for soil health all over the country. And I've gone to some of those trainings with them, and it's pretty exciting what they're doing. And also, California, the state of California, I think, is ahead of anybody else in the country in terms of legislation that will reward farmers for building up carbon in their soils. And France is going into the climate talks soon. And as part of their platform of what to do about global warming, they are going in with a soil carbon sequestration policy recommendation. So again, I think it's a really, really hopeful time. And I'll end with a quote from this guy named Peter Donovan, who's in my book, and he's mounted something called the Soil Carbon Challenge. So he travels all over the country in this big yellow school bus. He's probably been up here. And he measures the carbon content on farms and ranches and monitors the change in that soil carbon over a period of 10 years. And it's connected to what the management practices of whoever owns that land. And so whoever increases their soil carbon the most gets the prize. So I told him about how amazed I was that everybody that I had talked to about this soil health movement was optimistic about the planet's future. And everybody else I knew was depressed, horribly depressed. And he said, it kind of still gives me chills every time I read it, he said, They're optimistic because they're connected with the most powerful geologic force, which is life. Most of what we take to be the physical environment is the creation of living organisms over time. That's a different paradigm than the idea that life is a fragile passenger on a dead planet. So I just love that. You know, we're not a fragile passenger on a dead planet. We have powerful allies in the soil, and we're understanding more about what they do and how our actions can either help them or hurt them do what they're there to do. And we can all play a role in helping them by the food that we choose to eat and knowing who produces it, by the way we treat our land. And you don't even have to be a farmer or a rancher to treat land well. You know, 80% of American homeowners have lawns. Lots of us live in cities where there are parks, and even areas alongside highways, I think, can be thought of as places that can store carbon. I mean, we really, every time we look at the land, we should think, that needs a plant. That needs to store carbon. And also by the choices we tell our government to make. You know, the Farm Bill is ridiculously hard to pay attention to and complicated, but we've got to because we want to have a voice in what our government sends our tax dollars to support. Does it support an agriculture that makes the problem worse, that keeps making the problem worse, or does it go to support an agriculture that not only heals the land, but makes food that heals us? I mean, a lot of people are so sick because they're eating food that's been grown in a sick way. So we have allies. And I like to think of those life forms in the soil as heroes of the underground. I tried to talk my editor at Rodale into letting that be the title of my book, Heroes of the Underground. But I like to think that all of us can be heroes of the underground too. So thank you. And
anybody, but they're back there.
yes.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion this afternoon. I think all of us are concerned about the soil. My concerns are focused on a broad range of things, but I'm especially interested in the rapid evolution of the various antibiotic resistant bugs that are causing
Sorry, I
increasing
can't hear
human
you.
illness.
Maybe say that over again.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That microphone's coming right here.
Thanks for the interesting chat this afternoon. I'm very curious about the relationship. How's that? I'm not used to this. Thank you for a very interesting talk this afternoon. I'm especially interested in the relationship of soil and the rapid evolution of various bacterial pathogens in humans. Specifically, these various bugs that are becoming basically things that are things that are basically not treatable by current antibiotics. Recently, I've read that this rapid rise of these various bugs is secondary to the use of antibiotics in animals. Some saying that it's 60 to 80% of all antibiotics used in the U.S. are not for people, but for farm animals. What is your thought about the newly evolving hypothesis that these pathogenic bacteria are not evolving in the animals, but are actually evolving in soils which the animals are standing on? And if so, are there any thoughts, based on your work, concerning how we can combat these evolving bugs, not in the animals, but in the soil which they're standing on? Thank you.
I don't know about the research about the pathogenic bacteria being in the soil. I mean, I think that the way you know, when we went to a factory model of raising animals for food, the CAFOs, the confined animal operations, I think, you know, we were just setting ourselves up for disaster, I think. You know, so those operators give animals low levels of antibiotics all the time in the hopes that of keeping disease, that, you know, because when animals are in those really crowded environments, disease breaks out quickly. So I think they're doing it to try to keep the level of disease down, and they're doing it to fatten the animals. You know, those antibiotics. I mean, there's been really interesting research about how antibiotics kill off organisms that are needed in the stomach to modulate weight. So when the antibiotics are killing that off, then the animals are growing without those necessary microorganisms. You know, I basically think that all those operations are just kind of an abomination, and that we need to turn away from that kind of raising animals as quickly as we can. I only eat, as much as is in my power, animals that have been raised on grass, animals that have been raised the way they evolved to live. So I think that, you know, I think that once we break away from that model of you know, raising animals in concentration camps, that some of those problems with microorganisms that we can't fight, those super microorganisms, will dissipate. That doesn't really answer your question completely, because I don't know that much about that research and that those microorganisms are in the soil.
There are several very good articles, also a very good program on PBS Frontline concerning the rapid evolution of these bugs, specifically Staph aureus species that are now outside of hospitals, so-called community-acquired Staph aureus infections that have no known treatment currently, and correlations between soil contamination in various animal concentration camps, as you say, with adjacent community-acquired infections in communities.
No, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. As to what to do about the organisms that are in the soil, you know, I think that I think it's probably the same answer as for everything else, to turn those lands back into something that is growing naturally. There are going to be pathogens in the soil to those things, and to let, you know, nature resume to take its course.
So we have a question back here, Brad.
A couple comments. First one is just I want to put a plug in for the little bit more in-depth information on this from some producers over in North Dakota and that are doing this sort of stuff at the Rosebud Conservation District on the 1st and 2nd of December. Doug McCrae, one of our members, is the chairman of this outfit, and Rosebud County Conservation District is really trying hard to do a lot of this stuff. Second one, in relation to this gentleman's comments, are that these kind of ag operations that don't use these sort of things require consistency and time, and it's a bigger issue than just not using things like boron. It's about consistent management and someone coming in who's younger than me. I'm a young rancher. Anyhow, and a future vision that, and a farm plan and a market that enables these sort of things to happen. It's simple yet very complex, but thank you so much for your book and your comments.
Thanks, Brad. I'd just like to add to your plug that the meeting in Forsyth on the 2nd and 3rd is going to be Gabe Brown and also Elaine Ingram, who is another very nationally known expert on the soil. So it's going to be a really interesting program.
Gabe and Elaine are awesome.
Thing. Getting back to soil. How does the typical amateur gardener, such as myself, walk out in his or her garden and confer with their soil and get a diagnosis? Are you healthy or are you not? I myself, I confer with my earthworms, but my earthworms are happy. I assume that the soil is happy, but what is your?
I don't ask my soil that question. I ask myself, am I doing the things that I know support that garden, support that relationship between plants and soil microorganisms? So, I kind of, when I go out in my garden, I kind of think, what would Gabe Brown be doing? So, I disrupt the soil as little as possible. So if I'm putting in a new, I used to think that that to put in a new garden, or even to go back to a garden that I've had for a while, I needed to rototill it or turn the, do all that effortful stuff, turning the soil over. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. So I disturb the soil as little as possible. If I have a seed to poke in, I take a chopstick and poke a tiny hole and put the seed in, which is kind of what Gabe uses on his land. He has a no-till drill, and it's just like pokes a tiny little soil, a little hole, and covers it up. And if I am putting in a plant that's in a pot, I dig a hole that's exactly that big and no bigger. And I try to have cover crops growing around everything that so if I'm putting in a tomato plant, I'm trying to have other things growing right. I'm trying to have the soil covered as much as possible. I'm trying to have it like that 140 plants that are in that square foot of prairie soil where you can't even see the soil. All you can see is the plants growing there. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to have a lot of diversity in there. My garden looks like a mess. I think that there are some garden designers and landscape designers who are taking some of these ideas and actually figuring out how people could do it in an attractive way or a pretty way. But my garden kind of looks like a mess. And when I see things coming up, like when I see clover coming up, I don't think, oh, I've got to take that out. I just sort of snip it, and I figure it's like making mulch in place. I snip it, and spread it around. So that's how I do it. Hit or miss. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question in terms of pH. Years ago, I had cancer growing across my face, and I needed to support my kids, and I had to find a cure for this. Okay, baking soda, I made a paste, put it on 6 days on, 6 days off, because it says it's fungus. Okay, and I found out that if you use baking soda throughout your house, dishwater, dish everywhere, I never got sick. Okay, my understanding is the fact that you change the pH. Viruses and bacteria don't exist, so you don't get sick. So the side effects from baking soda are none. So when I went and toured the Tintina mine out of white sulfur, I talked to them about how they reclaimed the debris from their process in terms of the pH. Because if you return your pH level to the earth properly, or change it in your body by soda soaps, you don't have the viruses, bacteria, fungus there. So I'm kind of curious in terms of creating healthy soil by looking at the pH. Was that a part of your... It's very impactful, because if medical field would look at that, we would not have the same situation with antibiotics being poured into your system, because when you change your pH, your body can naturally do what it's supposed to be doing. Can we do that on the soil level?
I don't know, you know, the way I look at all of this is how can we be doing as much as possible what nature is doing? How can we be doing what we see going on already in nature? And I don't. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What I think we need to talk about is irrigation. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a farmer, I'm not a rancher, but I live in a farming ranching community. And I see irrigation, but I didn't hear you talk about irrigation of the rancher, who was so successful. How was he making sure it had enough water did he irrigate?
The farmer Gabe Brown that's in my book and that's going to be at that talk, he does not irrigate. He takes out water. If his cattle need water, he gets water out there to them, but he doesn't irrigate.
So, so he doesn't have to water the plants that he's putting in the soil?
He does not. No, he does not.
Okay.
Go to Forsyth.
I'm wondering, all the stuff that's out there growing in my house, by all the farmers and ranchers, it's not being watered. That is being watered, it seems to grow. It's not being watered, it's not.
Yeah, he doesn't irrigate. You can go online and look for yourself at all the stuff he's doing in his farm. It's Brown's farm. He does not irrigate.
So I think we're about out of time here, so I think we've got lots of good information, and I think Northern Plains is going to do some interesting work along these lines. So thanks again. I think time for lunch, and don't forget to sign the documents. Yeah, that's
Intellectually about some of the stuff we're talking about.